So the final film we're going to review is coming out later in the month, around the 29th in the UK. I think it's Australian-British co-production, The Nightingale, directed by Jennifer Kent. It does take place in Australia. Jim, tell me a little bit about the film.
So it takes place in Australia in the 19th century. So I think it's about the mid 1800s, and it basically follows a young Irish woman who is there as part of a penal colony. She's a convict, and she's under the care of kind of, British military forces. And she has been married, and she's due a letter to allow her to leave effectively and go into, the care of her husband, basically. This has been denied her. The head of the unit has kind of procrastinated on this and hasn't done it. So basically, without wanting to get into too many details, basically what happens is her reaction to not getting this letter is seen as an act of insubordination, and there's a fight, and basically this woman is wronged, really, on various different levels, and we'll get into that in a moment. And what then happens is she sets out after these military personnel who have now left on a revenge quest, effectively.
Right. Jim, I don't know if you knew much about the film before you picked it, but you could not have picked a more painful film to watch from I think it's 7 minutes in, and you're involved in the first rape scene. There's 3 or 4 in the film. Nobody in this world is having a good time.
No.
It's so devastating.
Yeah, it is. And just giving the number of rape scenes in this film doesn't actually really do justice to quite how difficult it actually is to watch. So this film, I think it's been on the festival circuit, and I first kind of heard about it when it came to the London version of Sundance, and I think it premiered at Melbourne in Australia, and there was a lot of talk about people walking out of the film, and I can see why. To be honest, it is an extremely difficult film to watch. What I would say is it's quite a smart film. I don't think it's not. It has avoided this trope of kind of rape as an empowerment thing. I do think it avoids that, and the central performance as Claire by Aisling Franciosi, who's an Irish-Italian actress, she's superb. And I think Jennifer Kent's direction is very good. So Jennifer Kent is probably best known for The Babadook, which I've not seen, unfortunately, but certainly, it seems to be very well regarded. And the way that she shot the film, I think, is very interesting. There are quite a lot of horror elements to this in terms of the framing and, the blocking of how characters move through frames and scenes. So it's a very accomplished film. I think it's very well done. I think it's a legitimate question to ask as to the ideas that she's trying to get across and the arc that her characters are going on. There's a question whether it's been maybe pushed just that little bit far. Mm-hmm. I think that is a legitimate concern to bring up. Because really, if you watch this film, basically, I would imagine what you're going to come out of this thinking is that's a really well-made film, but dear God, is it hard to get through.
Yeah, there's a film that comes to mind which is way worse than this, that I saw one time in a theater, and it was called 29 Palms, and when I walked out of that, I was like, I want those 2 hours of my life back, because it put me in a very, very bad mood. And whether or not I just saw a headline of, a review which says necessarily brutal. Does this film need to be this brutal to tell a story about a penal colony and, and rape and, what the British soldiers would have done and what, the way that people were treated? Maybe, but it's such a hard subject matter in a part of history that is and it's very hard to take, during a narrative story.
Yeah, and the other thing is, you've touched upon it there. The brutality and the difficulty in this film, it goes beyond as difficult as they are. It goes beyond the rape scenes, because there's a lot of mistreatment of the native people of Australia in this, which again, given the time and the setting, that is what happened, and I believe that there are organisations and groups in Australia who testified to the fact that in that respect the film is accurate. Accuracy notwithstanding, I don't know how well that works on film, and I've always been a bit wary of the term necessarily brutal. Because if you're telling a story, you need people to engage with it. In order to get across because basically the journey, the main kind of emotional journey of the film is Claire basically becomes attached to an Indigenous man called Billy, right? Who basically at the start of it, she basically employs him really to accompany her on this journey through the kind of like forested wilderness, effectively, in pursuit of these men who have wronged her. And it starts off as, quite an antagonistic relationship. Like, she's a little bit racist, he's a little bit racist in response. And they slowly start to kind of like break those barriers down. And, I'm making it sound more cliched than I think it comes across, but, realize they have more in common than they think. Like, there was one part that kind of like raised a smile to my mind when he's kind of getting on his high horse about how dreadful the English are and having a go at her, and she points out she's Irish, she hates the English just as much as he does, and so that's kind of the main emotional arc. And basically it seems to be about finding kind of like common humanity in the face of like what is like pretty brutal behaviour of other human beings. There is a question about whether that it does drown it out. Really, like some of the
relationship,
as in the brutality, I think maybe drowns out that central relationship a little bit.
I think the relationship was the part that just kept me going in this film. The only thing that I could like grasp onto that like wasn't wanting me to walk out, and what was that kind of like survival, coming together and working together to help each other, and the other people which they would find along the way that were somewhat helpful, or like you said, the genuine humanity of some people in the face of a really terrible history and a terrible sense of racism, and obviously other activities that were happening to convicts and women. Yeah,
because there's a certain amount, because obviously the big kind of the elephant in the room with this film is also kind of colonialism, really. Right. This is all driven from the British in Australia, and everything that entails about like how they operated in that country. So you've kind of got the microcosm of their relationship and what that represents, but then the driver for all of it above that is kind of the brutality which is fostered by colonialism. This idea of people being superior to other races, other peoples, and that sort of thing. I just keep coming back to, I'm very impressed by the film, but I did find it very difficult, and I'm not criticising it from a it's unnecessarily difficult. I'm not criticising it from it's an unrealistically difficult, because I think everything it shows, based on what I've seen, it is accurate. This stuff did happen. It was horrible and it was brutal. There is an element of, if you're trying to tell a story, whether you kind of drag people out of that story by it being so brutal. There are a couple of scenes where I did find it difficult to make through it. Like I did kind of breathe a sigh of relief when certain scenes finished, and I feel like maybe I've not engaged with those scenes quite as much as maybe Jennifer Kent intended me to as a result. Now maybe that's my own problem, but I don't think, based on what I've seen, I'll be the only person who has that reaction to some of those scenes.
Yeah, I'm the same way. My gut reaction to, like you said, very well shot, very well told story was there. There's no real complaints on the filmmaking capabilities of this film. what, I'm also not. I also am like very sensitive to rape scenes, so that's going to be an immediate thing that I won't usually watch films with that. But my gut response to a film means I need something there that like brings me in, draws me to it, and makes and says, wow, like that was worth my 2.5 hours or whatnot. And this one just was painful. Yeah,
it's a very well made film, but I think it's a classic buyer beware situation, to be honest.
So, trigger alert, I guess.
Oh yeah, no, I mean for certain. Like I would be surprised if this film doesn't come with warnings on it and 18 and all the rest of it. It's